I'm beginning. Right. Just a second. Let me do it. So the topic of my talk is Deities, Not Demons, the Supernatural in Kathāsaritsāgar. So the first picture you're seeing here is the Lord Mahadev, Shiv, and his consort, Ma Parvati. So they will form a very important part in these narration of the tales. So Kathāsaritsāgar is basically a cycle of stories which have open-ended endings. So the first narrators in these stories are Shiv, the god himself, the supreme deity. So he tells these stories to his wife, and his wife pesters him to tell stories only that no one has ever heard. But what happens that some of his guns, who are basically semi-divine deities, and they actually serve the Lord and the Kuya and his wife, the goddess, eavesdrop on them, and they hear the stories. So one such gun is Pushpadant. So what Pushpadant does is that he hears the stories that Shiv is telling his wife Parvati, and he tells those stories to his wife Jaya, and who in return tells the stories to Parvati, which angers her, and she fights with her husband that why did you tell me a story that everyone already knows? So Shiv, because he is the supreme god, he knows that what went through, and he tells her everything, and she curses the Gans, Pushpadant and Malayan, because Malyavan tries to save Pushpadanta. So basically, when her anger is soothed down and she is feeling sorry for cursing them, what happens that Pushpadanta becomes, she curses them that they, in their next life, will become mortal human beings. Till now, they were living in heaven, they were living with the gods, but now they have to live with the mortal humans. And Pushpadant actually becomes Vararuchi. And Malyavan, who is very important, he becomes Gunadhya. So Gunadhya is basically the writer of and the Brihat Katha. Brihat Katha is the work from which Kathāsaritsāgar is inspired from, and actually Kathāsaritsāgar is based on this work by Gunadhya, which is Brihat Katha. But just a second, there's something wrong. Sam, there's something wrong with my PPT. It's not working.
1 second.
I think it's better. So what happens that Gunadhya is the real author of Brihat Katha, but he writes these tales in Paishachi language. So Paishachi is basically a language of spirits, and it's spoken by the ghosts and the supernatural deities and all that. And that's why when he presents his work before the king is furious at him for presenting him such a work, because Gunadhya has not only written it in a language of the spirits and the ghosts, he has also written it with his blood. So he finds it very gruesome. And what Gunadhya does is basically he goes into the forest and he starts tearing the pages of his manuscript, and he starts burning them one by one. And what happens that all the animals surround Gunadhya. And as you can see in this picture, in this slide, you can see that all the animals surround Gunadhya, and he tells them the stories because he recites the stories as he burns the pages. So they start crying. They relate with the story so much that they start crying. And all of a sudden, the king who insulted Gunadhya falls ill because of eating bad meat. So the doctors in the kingdom try to revive the king and all that, and they learn that the uh, animals basically are not eating, they have stopped eating, and they are all surrounding Gunadhya, and they are listening to the tales. So now the king realizes his mistake and goes to Gunadhya, but only he had written around 700,000 verses, but only 100,000 verses of the work survives. So then comes into play Somadeva. So in years and centuries later, in 11th century Kashmir, Somadeva Bhatta was a Brahmin who compiled these stories. But he gives the due credit to Gunadhya that this work is basically a retelling of Gunadhya's Brihat Katha. But Somadev's Kathāsaritsāgar is in Sanskrit. And 11th century was also the time in which Kashmir there was profound Shaivism in Kashmir, and so Tantra was very popular at the time. So you see that there are 18 books in Kathāsaritsāgar, but I won't be going in details. I'm only focusing on the representation of the supernatural figures. So the first supernatural figure is Yoginis, there are Yakshinis, there's Nag, and there are Vidyadhars. And there's a part of this book which is the Vetal Panchvimshati, also called Vetal Pachisi or Vetal and the Vikram and the Vampire, as translated by Sir Richard Burton. So these set of tales are more popular than Kathāsaritsāgar. Uh, so I'll be dealing with this. And there are also some lost manuscripts that I would be discussing. So we need to know in which scenario Somadev compiled these stories. So in 11th century Kashmir's historical chronology we have in Kalhan's Raj Tarangini. So Kalhan basically discusses that King Ananta and his wife Suryamati, they are very sad, and because King Ananta's son Kalash actually rebels against his own father and overthrows him and insults him in court, because of which Anant commits suicide and his wife Suryamati commits sati. Basically, she burns herself with her husband. So what happens that before this, Suryamati tries to make peace between the father and son duo. So she asks Somadeva who was their court poet, to write a set of stories or narrate her stories which will please her and obviously ease her depression. So that is the scene that in which Somadeva wrote or compiled the Kathāsaritsāgar at the um, request of the queen herself. So as you can see, the first slide is that of the Yogini. Now, in Kathāsaritsāgar, these yoginis appear frequently, and not just yoginis but yogis. Now, one very important thing is when we think of yoga, we think of it as a form of physical beautification. You stay fit, that's why you do yoga. And many people come to India to learn this yoga from the gurus and all that. But to be honest, what we mean by yoga right now is not something that it initially was. So yogis and yoginis were basically, they used to meditate, and they used to do it in a form of ritualistic practices that they used to perform. So these yoginis are very popular. Basically, they serve the goddess and they are there attending deities. So the goddess is the supreme queen, king the King Suryamati, when she asked Somadeva to discuss all these things, then we need to see that Suryamati was basically a Shaivite herself. And Kashmir was in the grip of Shaivism and Tantra at the time. So there were many Shiva temples and yoginis and these Garns and these Yaksh and all these things, because Shiv is not just the god of the humans, he's also the god of the Pishach, the yoginis, the yakshinis, and the spirits, anyone, all of the ghosts, every creature is basically, they worship Shiva. So he's not just a god for the humans. So the yoginis attend on his wife, Ma Parvati, and she is the supreme goddess, and they are her attendees. In the Kathāsaritsāgar set of tales, what happens that the yoginis are basically very good looking, and they try to seduce men when in their mortal forms. When they are cursed, for instance, by the gods or anyone, they are cursed and they have to take birth in on earth, and they are mortal. They they can be, if they marry a man, for instance, a human, then that man's fortune and everything will increase, and he will also attain some good powers, and he will succeed. But the if the yoginis associate with the women in general, then the association is not considered very right, because they were very liberating, and both sexually and in other ways very independent. So this first picture that you are seeing is from the Chausit Yogini temple in Hirapur, Odisha. Uh, so basically these sculptures have been damaged because it's very, very old. It's, I think, ninth century CE this temple was built. And it's one of the most powerful temples for Tantra. It's a tantric temple, and it has no roof. The temple is in circular shape. It's and there's no roof over it, and it's still there till date. There's a legend associated with it that um, people after the sun sets don't really go near the temple, because they believe that the yoginis come down and they perform their practices, they perform whatever rituals they do, and that's why they try not to go near the temple. I don't know how much of it is true, but this is something that people do there. So, and then the second picture you are seeing is basically Devi Yogini from Tibet. So, the Tantra is not just a part of the Shaivism sect of Hinduism, it's also part in the Buddhism. You will find some yoginis there also, because Hivajra Tantra is something that the Buddhist, in Buddhism you'll find. Now, there's this deity called Yakshini or Yaksha. So the first one is a Yakshini, the second one is a Yaksha. And this I took, this basically is a sculpture from a Jain temple. So they are also the attending deities. So basically the tribal and indigenous people, they have their own gods and goddesses. So they worship them, and they basically, if you go to some remote areas in India where there's native population, there's basically indigenous Adivasi people. So they worship certain gods and goddesses who maybe in the mainstream people don't really worship them or don't know about them. So basically, they consider them as protectors of their village and their community. And this is basically the Vidyadhars and the Vidyadharis form they are particularly the most important part of the Kathāsaritsāgar series, because the ultimate achievement that they humans want is to become a Vidyadhar. Vidyadhar is basically Vidya means knowledge. So basically, they are possessors of knowledge and wisdom, not just the knowledge of the textual knowledge that we know, but they basically know about the how to make a yantra. Yantra is basically like an invention they make. That as you can see, they are flying. So Vidyadhars can fly. They are neither uh, gods, they are neither humans. They are somewhere in between. So neither they basically have certain qualities, magical qualities that they have. They can fly. They are knowledgeable. They are shapeshifters as well, but they are semi-divine deities, and the characters in Kathāsaritsāgar actually want to become a Vidyadhar. So basically, if you want to possess knowledge, then you have to become a Vidyadhar or a Vidyadhari. And that's how they do. And now we have this very important sculptures we have there, Nag. So Nag is basically serpent. But in India, they are quite revered. So this is basically in some of the stories you will find that there's a Nag prince. So basically, Nags are not just the serpents. There's also a tribe uh, on the basis of serpents. So these are basically the Nag sculptures that I got. And here's the most important part. This is the most popular book of the series, the Vetal Panchvimshati. So as you can see, this is a king here, and there's this Vetal. Now this Vetal Some scholars suggest that the Vetal was the predecessor of the vampire. The Vetal is basically a spirit that possesses a dead body. So the story goes like this: that King Vikramaditya is given every day he is given a fruit by yogi. So yogi is person who performs meditations and kind of such rituals and all. So he always offers the king a fruit. So the king never noticed it. One day he noticed that every day he's giving him the same fruit. So he cut open the fruit and he found gems in it. So he asked the yogi that how come you can afford to give me such precious stones? So the yogi tells him that I need a favor from you. If you can please do these things. So he said that Vikramaditya basically doesn't want the gems, but he was a very ideal monarch. So he was like, any help you need, I'll help you. So he goes, the yogi calls him to a cremation ground. Now, the cremation ground in India, for those who don't know, in India, dead bodies in Hindus, when a person dies, then there are some rituals performed, and the dead body is basically burnt. So that place is the cremation ground. So the yogi calls Vikramaditya to the cremation ground, and at night, and he asks him to only bring his sword, which Vikramaditya does. So you can see that he has a sword in his hand. So then the yogi tells him that he is performing a ritual, and in that ritual he requires a dead body. So the king is a bit taken aback that why does he need a dead body? But because he had given his word to the yogi, he agrees, and he goes to the particular tree where a dead body is basically hung. So the yogi had warned him that when you carry the dead body on your shoulders, do not speak to it. If any single word you'll speak, the dead body will again uh, be hanged on the tree. So what Vikramaditya does, that he does exactly what the yogi had asked him to do. And when he tries bringing the dead body, then the dead body again goes flying back to the tree. And twice and thrice he does that. When he's fed up of it, he then again takes the dead body on his shoulders. And as you can see, he's there. So that's when the Vetal for the first time starts speaking. So the Vetal tells him that your journey is long and let me narrate stories to you. So Vikramaditya doesn't utter a word because he knows that if he utters a word, it will not work in his favor. So the Vetal starts narrating the stories to Vikramaditya. And what happens that after every story ends, Vikramaditya is expected to give the answer. But Vetal had also warned him that if you know the answer and if you don't speak, then you will die. So if you know the answer, you will have to answer. You stay silent only when you don't know the answer. So Vikramaditya, and what happens that when Vikramaditya answers, because he knows what should be. Basically, the stories are like these, that there's open ending, and Vikramaditya, Betal is trying to see whether Vikramaditya is really an ideal monarch or not. So when Vikramaditya answers the questions of the Vetal and he's correct, the Vetal again goes flying back to the same tree, and the cycle continues for 25 times. It's only when the 24th tale is told by the Vetal that Vikramaditya stays silent. Now, that tale is very important because that tale basically deals with incest, which is something I think we generally don't talk about here. So basically, what happens that there's a king, and his enemy attacks his kingdom. So he asks his wife and his daughter to take his daughter and escape. So she does accordingly, and they seek refuge in a forest near a lake. And her husband eventually dies. And what happens that another king of comes near that lake, and he sees the queen and his daughter, and his son is also with him, the prince and the king. And the king marries the queen, and his son marries her daughter. So Vetal asks that, what do you think the relationship is between them? So Vikramaditya couldn't answer this question because he really didn't know what to say. he stays silent. And that's when the Vetal reveals that basically where you're taking me, that person is not there to do anything. The yogi, whose name is Shantishil, will actually an actual a tantric, and he will sacrifice you. So in tantra, basically, if someone that is low form of tantra, someone wants to attain siddhi, siddhi is basically attaining that if you go to a cremation ground and there's a dead body, and you have to sit on that dead body, and you have to chant all the mantras and all that, and you cannot be scared. Like if you are scared, then the yoginis or then the deities you are trying to worship and please will come after you. So you don't have to be scared there, and you have to perform the rituals accordingly. So basically, Vetal is very powerful. So what the tantric had in mind, that he will sacrifice King Vikramaditya, and he will control the Vetal. Once the Vetal will come under his control, like the jinn, then he will conquer the world. So basically, the king listens to the Vetal, and he does exactly like how the Vetal had told him. So when the tantric asks the king to bow down, the king asks him that, why don't you teach me how to do it? And as soon as the tantric does that, he basically beheads the tantric, and the Vetal gives him all the siddhis, and Vikramaditya becomes the most powerful king ever. So this is basically, I've just given a backdrop of what I'll be talking about. And let's move on to the next slide. Now, this is basically the illustration of the translation, or should I say an adaptation by Sir Richard Burton. So you can see that the Vetal here is basically a skull, and he has wings like that of a bat. So these illustrations are also to be blamed in a certain way, because people think that the Vetal does look like that, but it's actually not true. Uh, and this, the third picture that you are seeing, you're seeing here that there's a goddess basically is coming out of a few of a fire. She is basically coming out, and all the people will salute to the goddess, because the goddess forms a very important part in these rituals and these folklore. So you cannot offend the goddess and just go by. She'll come after you. So here is it. So the Vetal basically is not just a folklore, like of folklore figure. Earlier we used to think so, but in Goa, which is in India, there are villages, and there are people in those villages who actually worship them. And Vetal is basically called a gun of Shiva. They are called protectors. So this first picture that you're seeing is of the Lolem Vetal, and it's in the midst of forest. So what people of these areas do is that they leave flowers, they leave blankets and fruits or anything. They think that at night, when the Vetal will rise to protect the village, he might need them. And sometimes they put slippers also. And the second picture is from a temple, which is a Sri Vetal temple in Amuna village in Goa. So in the villages, you'll find that they have their own deities. And they have their own rituals, and sometimes not everyone can look easily at some of the rituals, because it can be disturbing for some, but they have their belief systems. So basically, they don't consider Vetal as anything of a monster or a demon, like how they generally are portrayed. And even in the last slide, you can see that the Vetal, initially people thought, I mean, like generally people think that is a ghost, is demon, and he is there to kill the king. But actually, what through those stories, Vetal was testing the king, that he for real or not? Is he uh, courageous? Is he brave? Is he honest or not? And he actually teaches him a lot through those stories. So here you find that it's not just the Sherazad moment where Sherazad is narrating the tales to save her life. Basically, Vetal is narrating the tales to save the life of the king here, and he's not even alive. So the people in Goa still, Betal worship is very much prominent there in these villages, be it Amona. You'll find them worshipping them, and they consider them as protectors who protect their village and everyone in the village. So basically, people, I mean, like at first go with what Sir Richard Burton had to say about it. So when Burton translated the Vikram and the vampire, it's not a translation. Basically, there are 25 tales, and none of these tales, all these tales are basically open-ended, and you need to go through all these tales to relate to what the Vetal is trying to convey. But Burton had selected only some 11 of the most popular ones and had compiled them, kind of an adaptation. But he did think that Vetal was like a vampire-like creature, and he considered him as the predecessor of the vampire. And some of the vampiric scholars who work on vampire studies actually credit that vampire somehow had its origin in the East, but we don't know how much of it is true, because there are also people um, like nowadays people are questioning this belief that the Vetal is basically a savior and people worship him, though he's not somehow related to the vampire. So this last slide that you are seeing is that of Chamunda. So this picture I took from one of my field works that I did in Bhubaneswar. And one thing I find very intriguing, and also I can't understand why people generally don't really go around these tantric temples. So this temple is basically in the capital city of Odisha, in Bhubaneswar, which is the capital of Odisha. And I asked some of the people's for locations, and basically they didn't know about it. And it's a very old temple. It's around, I think it was built in the 10th century by by a queen, and it's a very renowned temple for tantra. Now, obviously, those practices are not performed here, like animal sacrifices and all, and hardly anyone visits these temples. There's only a priest who has been um, like worshipping the goddess for like many years now. And there's also one thing that they don't, you cannot, like, you're not really allowed to touch the goddess. Because when I went there, I was allowed to go get inside, and it was dark. Only mother's eyes were visible. It was quite dark. And like I took the pictures and I had a wonderful time there. The priest there was very understanding, and he told me about everything, the engravings on the temples and all. But I was asked not to touch the goddess, because uh, what happens that if in case you are not well, if you have not maintained hygiene, if you're not taken a shower, and in case you have eaten something, your clothes are dirty or anything, if there is, and if you touch the goddess, they think that it will incur the wrath of the goddess on the priest, because it's their duty to take care of her. So this is something that I found very intriguing, and it's the same for most of the tantric temples except a few maybe. So I Okay, now I'll be talking like this. I've given you a brief intro of what I will be discussing about. So as I told you about Gunadhya, let's begin with Gunadhya himself. Am I audible, Sam? Okay. So basically, Gunadhya was born here of a Brahmin woman and a Nag father. So as I told you about the Nag tribes were very prominent. So they were half humans, half serpents. So Gunadhya is born of such parentage. So what happens once that the king I was talking about, who had previously insulted Gunadhya, what happens one day that the king and the queen and his queen are there near a lake, and they're enjoying. And what happens that the queen asks the king to stop splashing water on her face. She's tired of it. And what the king understands is that she's asking for sweets. So he brings sweets for her. And basically, what happens is that the queen considers herself as a Sanskrit scholar, and the king cannot understand Sanskrit, and he is not literate. So he feels insulted, and he asks all his ministers that teach me Sanskrit. So what happens that generally people say that the teachers and all scholars in his kingdom, everyone tells him that it takes around 12 years to learn Sanskrit, master Sanskrit, but I can teach you in six. Gunadi offers that I can teach you in about 6 years. Then one of his ministers, who is jealous of Gunadi, tells him that no, I can teach you him in 6 months. Then basically what happens is that Gunadhya challenges him, his minister, that if you can teach him Sanskrit in 6 months, then I will stop using any of the languages used by the humans. I will not speak Sanskrit and any language in which the humans converse in. So what happens is that now the minister is absolutely scared that what will happen if I will lose the challenge. So he starts performing penance and starts offering rituals to Shiva's son Kartikeya. And Kartikeya actually is pleased with him, with his penance, and he offers him his desire. And the minister basically asks him that the king should know Sanskrit, and it happens. So now the king is literate, so his kingdom is overjoyed. Everyone celebrates that now the king can also speak Sanskrit. But what happens that Gunathya gets depressed, and he keeps his vow and he stops communicating altogether because he had said that I will not communicate in any of the languages that the humans use. So what happens that he goes in the Vindhya forest and mm, there he meets the Pishach. Pishach is basically a spirit or a ghost like creature, Kanabhuti. So he meets him, and Kanabhuti narrates some stories to him. And that's how basically after hearing he hears the Pishachas talking in Paishachi language, and Gunadhi learns the Paishachi language, and that's how he basically creates this wonderful work called Brihat Katha. But till date, all the manuscripts of Brihat Katha are lost, and they couldn't survive. So that's why Somadev's Kathāsaritsāgar comes into play, and ironically, it's in Sanskrit, the manuscript by Somadev. So I will now mention some of the stories. I like to narrate some of the stories, which are very, very important. If you allow me. So the protagonist, generally we don't talk about the protagonist or the main narrator of these tales because there are multiple narrators. As I said, the first narration starts with Shiv and Parvati. Shiv is the narrator. He's narrating for his wife Parvati. And then you have when Parvati curses them, she tells them that what will happen, that Pushpadanta and Malyavan will be born as humans. And Pushpadanta will narrate the stories to Kanabhuti, and Kanabhuti will narrate the stories to Malyavan. And Malyavan, who is Gunadhya in his mortal form, has to make these stories popular. Then only his curse will end and he will attain his salvation. So that's how the narrators come into play. Yes, do you have something to say? Hello?
No, it was just somebody accidentally turned the camera on.
All right, no problem. So, the protagonist is basically Nirvahan Datta, and Kathāsaritsāgar is not it doesn't give any moral lessons to you. It's basically you have pleasure and desire, and you live your life in the current life. Like if you're living, then you enjoy your life as much as you can, which is so not like the other didactic text that we have in India. It's basically about meditation, it's about yoga, it's about connecting to the Almighty. But Kathāsaritsāgar isn't like that, and it's not religious, to be very honest. Religion, I don't find, plays a very pivotal role in the tales. So there's this character called Nishchay Datta. So Nishchay Datta, what happens that he visits a shrine one day and he prays, and he sees a woman whose name is Anurag Para. So he instantly falls in love with her, but she tells him that you come to my city, then only we can do something about it. So she invites him to her city, and she's a Vidyadhari, by the way. She's not a human, and Nishchay Datta is a human. So he travels and travels and travels, and on the way he's enslaved by some robbers, and he is tortured. Somehow he reaches his destination, but what in the midst there's a temple of Shiva, and there are 4 travelers along with him, and all of them are told about this Yakshi. Uh, and basically, she's a Yakshini who eats men only. She eats the men. Anyone who stays overnight, she eats them. So they basically draw a circle and they start chanting the mantra so that the Yakshi or the Yakshini won't attack them. But what happens that as the Yakshi comes, as I said, that they're shapeshifters. They can take the form of a very beautiful woman and they're very seductive. So she tries to seduce the men and they just look at her eyes and they get enamored by her. And 3 of the men stop chanting the mantras and she eats them. But it's only Nishchay Datta who kind of controls her, and he's able to uh, stop her from eating him. And he controls her and tells her that if you will not help me, then I will, I will torture you. So the Yakshini says that, okay, I will take you to your beloved. She dwells in the Vidyadhar areas, and she's a Vidyadhari. She is the daughter of the king of the Vidyadhars. So what happens that the Yakshini takes him on his back, Nishchay Datta, and she flies. And the Anurag Para and Nishchay Datta meet each other and they have a Gandharv Vivaha. So basically, Gandharv Vivaha is very prominent thing that you'll find in the Indian scriptures. There are 8 types of marriages. Gandharv Vivaha is one of them. It's not like very respected, but it's basically that there's a man, there's a woman, and they consider each other husband and wife. They consummate their marriage and they are married. So you don't need to have any rituals performed and you are married. So they have a Gandharva Vivaha and they are married. So every day what happens that um, Nishchay Datta has a friend, Somadatta, who is basically cursed by some yogini and he's made a monkey. So Nishchay Datta is really fond of him. So he goes to meet him every day. So he requests his wife, Nurag Para, to kind of fly him there because he is a human, he cannot fly. So she gets fed up of him that every day I can't take you there. So Nishchay Datta asks her that, why don't you teach me how to fly? So somehow he learns how to fly and every day he goes to meet his friend Somadatta. And what happens that once another Vidyadhar crosses his house and he sees Anurag Para and he falls in love with her and they have a clandestine affair. And throughout all this, Somadatta, his monkey friend, is well aware of because he considers that the vices of women cannot be tolerated. And what happens that Anurag Para starts an affair with him, and one day somehow Nishchay Datta finds it out, and he's devastated. So that's how it turns out. So basically, the women here, if you find them, they won't hesitate in expressing their desires, and it's not considered as morally wrong in the stories, which is so not that you'll find another set of stories. It's basically if you talk about Savitri and Satvahan, you find that though there's this ideal wife here who can go to the Lord of Death and bring back her dead husband. But here are women, um, celestial women in their human forms, killing their husbands for their lovers and then deceiving the lovers as well. And they are experiencing all sorts of things. So, and that's how these things happen. So basically, I would also like to say that this character of Vikramaditya is very important because we think of him as an Arthurian, like he's just like King Arthur and his legends. But what happens that King Arthur's father, King Uther, was not an ideal monarch. In the same way, King Vikramaditya's father wasn't an ideal monarch either. So his father, what happens that when he is not born, Gandhar was saying, he sees tapasvi, basically a sage, performing penance in a forest, and he has been performing penance for 1,000 years now, and he's stopped eating anything. He just eats the bark of the tree. For 1,000 years, he's meditating, and he pledges to break his penance. And he sends an Apsara. So Apsara is basically, they are like these. They dwell in the heaven with the gods, and they're beautiful, gorgeous women, and they're often used to seduce men and sages. in particular for the while they're performing penance. So he sends one such woman to him, and she starts to, kind of divert his attention and all. Eventually, when she doesn't succeed, she makes some sweet balls and adds some herbs in it, and she kind of when the sage eats it, the sage's name is basically Valkalasan. So Valkalasan eats the sweet balls, and he's enamored with her, and he's in love with her, and he leaves all his penances for 1,000 years that he's been practicing. And from a forest dweller and a tapasvi, he becomes a domesticated person. And when they basically, he asks the woman to marry him, but he refuses. She refuses basically. She says that I can't marry you because I'm a heavenly woman and you are a mortal being, so I can't marry you. But they start living together, and they have a son. And when the son turns 1 year old, the woman complains that now we cannot live in the forest. It's not safe for the baby. So the same person, basically, he takes his son in a basket and he puts it on his head and takes it to the king's court. And when the king looks at him, he basically laughs at him and insults him that, see what I have done. He was performing penance for 1,000 years and I have obstructed his penance. And in a fit of rage, um, he takes the basket and he throws it on the floor, and the baby is dismembered. So one part of the baby, his head falls, head falls in the court, and his feet falls in the old merchant's chamber, and his trunk, his main part of the body, falls in the potter's house. And surprisingly, the king's wife, the queen, the oil merchant's wife, the potter's wife, both conceive a baby on the very same day. And when they gave birth at the very same time, in the very same minute, to three boys. And the boy is Vikramaditya. The Prince Vikramaditya is born. But Prince Vikramaditya is nothing like his father. So that's how the stories are. Like, in generally, if you read any of the texts, be it Panchatantra or Hitopadesh, you'll find that there's a moral lesson always at the end. But in these stories, you'll find that if someone is performing penance or any such activities or rituals, it's considered futile. Like if we are doing it, for instance, the representation of yogis, the people who perform tantra, is not like very nice. Like there are some yogis like who perform these rituals, and they leave their homes and they become forest dwellers, and they have nothing to do with this world. Some of them still exist. They have nothing to do with this world. They live on their own in the mountains, barely wearing anything. And there's low form of tantra where you perform tantra to harm others. So you find these low forms of tantra in these folklores a lot, and that's why the tantric in the very beginning, the yogi tries to, sacrifice the king, because you need to sacrifice a human to attain that siddhis, which doesn't happen because the Vetal saves him. So So one more important thing about the Nagas, for instance, the people who are half humans, half serpents, you'll find them a lot in this folklore. Like Gunath here is half-breed himself. But Kashmir is very important because these set of stories are set in Kashmir. Like they have been compiled by a Kashmiri court poet, but their origin, like King Vikramaditya, is not the king of Kashmir. He's the king of Ujjain, which is far from Kashmir. He's a king of Ujjain in Madhya Pradesh, India. So some people have these things that uh, there's basically Nilmat Puran, where which was the source for Kalhan's Raj Tarangini. So in this text, what happens that the in Mahabharata, if you people know Mahabharata, I hope. So basically, there's this, it's the longest epic in the world. So in Mahabharata, the war is fought for like many years. So in this Puran, they ask him that why the king of Kashmir didn't, fight in the Mahabharata war despite having such a powerful empire. So this question is like a very valid question because they were busy fighting some other dynasties, and like this whole compilation of Kathāsaritsāgar in this time, in that period when the political unrest was there in Kashmir, is something very surprising. So I'll also will be discussing some of the stories, like for instance, if we talk about, we have talked about the Yakshinis now, and we have talked about the Yoginis. We need to talk. We have talked about the Vidyadharis, and we have talked about the Nagas. Now, Vetal is very important because I think it's the most popular figure, generally. Because of his association with the vampire-like creature. Now, there are many conspiracies about this, how the Vetal came into being. So some people say that but it's all speculation. There's no validity to it. Obviously, it's folklore. So they say that basically, tantric takes a boy from a very poor family, poor Brahmin family, and he basically teaches the boy for till he attains like 14, 15 years of age. He becomes 50 or 14 or 15 years old, and then he sacrifices the boy, and the boy becomes a Vetal. So anyone, because anyone who controls the Veda, like the jinn, if you have that lamp, Aladdin's lamp with you, if you have it, if you rub the lamp, the jinn comes out, and like the jinn will like fulfill your wishes. In the same way, if you have Vetal, and Vetal actually, if someone controls the Vetal, then you won't just have three wishes. You can conquer the world, and it's up to you whether you will use those powers for doing something good or you will try to harm someone. But in this case, like the yogi we saw in the beginning of Vital Panchvamshati, he wants to harm people. He basically doesn't have good ideas in mind. So if he conquers somehow the Vetal, he will kill people, he will control, like he will get rid of the king, become king himself, and he will torture people. So the Vetal is very important in this sense. So we have like in more like there's I think there's this adaptation in Bollywood, sorry, in Tollywood we have, in South cinema we have Vikram Vedha. So this is a very good film. It starts with the retelling of the Vetal Panchvimshati, the Vetal telling the stories to the king and the Tantric trying to harm everyone. And it takes a turn, and the movie is basically uh, sort of a crime thriller, I would say. It's not a horror film, and I like this adaptation very much because it's just a very good modern take on this whole series. So there's this cop who is infamous for his encounters. He basically shoots the criminals on spot, and there's this criminal who is Vetal, and he performs crime. He gives him clues, and he tells the cop realizes that he was actually not the main criminal, and he is able to identify the main criminal behind. Just like the Vetal stories we have, where Vetal is not the person who is trying to harm everyone, but the tantric is trying to harm people, like he wants to kill Vikramaditya. So there are some other stories as well. Two of the stories I like to recite. Uh, one such.
We're about 5 minutes away from the hour, Ragini, just so you
Okay, sure. So we have this tale of the Guh Chandra and his celestial bride. So there's this merchant called Dharmagupta, and he doesn't have a child. A daughter is born to him, and what happens is the daughter is born and she starts walking instantly and speaking. As soon as she is born, she starts speaking and she starts talking, everything. She walks and she's growing instantly. So he's taken aback. How come an infant is talking already and she's walking? So what happens that Dharmagupta, he asks his daughter, "Who are you?" So she tells him that I have been cursed, that's why I've taken birth in your home, and I've been born a mortal. But promise me that you will never marry me, and till like the moment I'll stay in your house, you will only prosper. So what happens that one fine day, a boy named Guhu Chandra sees his daughter, who is not a human, and he falls in love with her, and he proposes marriage, which she refuses. But because and he falls sick, then his father, boy's father, intervenes that please marry your daughter to my son, otherwise he'll die. All these things he says, and there's only one condition that she puts forward is that I will not sleep with him. Now, this is very important, like, and they agree to her, like, wish. And after they are married, then the boy's father tells him that, oh, this was just a ploy to get you married to her. You can do whatever you want. And what happens that his daughter-in-law just takes a sharp look at her father-in-law, and he dies. And his husband is so scared of her that what he does is that he starts doing charity and helping out the poor people and feeding the brahmins and the cows and all he does, just so that his wife is not angry at him. So what happens that when these celestial women, like the yakshinis, yoginis, or all these women, when they are cursed and they take a mortal human form, if they associate with a man, then the man's fortune would prosper. But they will not, they don't consider them as equals to the mortals because they are far above them. So that's how it like turns out. So, but for the women, it's just the opposite. Like so in some of the stories, the men tell one of the stories, a man tells a wife that don't associate with the yoginis. They are very bad. And the yogini overhears him, and she kinds of goes after him and basically makes him an ox and sells him to a butcher house. So in these set of stories, you won't find that the women would, they won't listen any of your nonsense, any of the things that the men put forward to. If they incur their wrath, then they basically harm them. And that's how in Tantra also, if the yoginis are pleased by you, they will give you boons, they will, you will prosper in life and all that. But in case if you incur their wrath, then they'll come after you. So it's actually not just folklore. It's a part of these rituals as well. That's why the temples and everything that I showed you is like a testament to it. And all these yakshinis and all these women, the celestial women, they have their names engraved in these temples as well. So we have evidences that these stories are not just in the form of manuscripts, they're also engraved in some of the temples. So that's how it is. Like, right. Yes, I